Hello and welcome. Today we will be talking about resilience in crisis work. We're going to begin with a video.
Here's to you, trying to make the world a better place. You take on the weight of it all, knowing there will be a cost, but never expecting to pay full retail for it. After a while, you notice something's getting to you. You're changing. You've been there. We've all been there. The answers just aren't all that easy anymore. Now you're too drained for even the smallest demands. You're numb. You feel like you can't do enough, and you've needed a nap since before the turn of the century. Maybe you're a school teacher, a public defender, or a member of the military. So why does the world feel like a different place to you? Maybe you're an ecologist, a doctor, a community organizer, or a caretaker to family members. It's all piling on, and some of your own choices could be starting to raise eyebrows. Let's face it, these days, when the world comes calling, you'd really rather not pick up. Your mind, blown, your spirit, broken, and your body is not taking any of this all that well. Something's just not how you remember, and that something could, in fact, be you. Hey, it's a struggle. We understand that. Doesn't mean it's too late for a change. We're here. We get it. And we have ideas for how to find a better way. Check us out.
Okay, so Trauma Stewardship is was a book written by Dr. Lipsky, and this is taking ideas of burnout and different types of effects that this field can have on people that work in it. And looking at how do we steward that trauma? How do we stay in this profession through all of the demands and still be healthy? So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to begin with this overarching idea of burnout. So, what is burnout? It's basically a state of chronic physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. And it's caused by stress and overwork. We're going to also talk about some related concepts. Burnout often coexists or results from vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, and compassion fatigue. So, what causes burnout? Well, high emotional demands. So, constant exposure to clients' trauma and crisis. And what does this look like? So, when you constantly hear stories of traumatic events that caused people to experience trauma, or you yourself are constantly in crisis situations, that is causing high emotional demands. Limited resources. Many of us in this field really do not have enough support within our agencies or access to resources for our clients and for ourselves. Lack of self-care. So at the end of the day, after you've had a long day, many of us don't feel like we have enough energy to really take care of ourselves. How do I do self-care when I feel as if I can't even go out and do something, right? Feeling undervalued. So this is a big one, and this is the effect of the organization that you may work for, and hopefully it's not the effect of the organization you're working for right now. But the idea is lack of recognition from management or from society in general. So if we don't feel valued by our organization or society, this can really lead to burnout because we're putting ourselves maybe in danger or we're emotionally taxed in the work that we're doing and it's unrecognized. And that can really bring a sense of feeling undervalued and unappreciated. So all of these can cause burnout. So what does it look like to live with burnout? Well, these are some of the signs you might see. Emotional exhaustion, feelings of being emotionally overextended and drained. Reduced performance, decreased productivity and quality of work, feeling ineffective at work. So this could look like maybe you're so emotionally exhausted, you've been so overextended that you just have nothing left to give at work. Emotional detachment. This looks like the inability to connect with others, clients or colleagues. You just don't have the bandwidth to do it. Cynicism, negative attitudes towards work and clients. And this can look like, you're really struggling with seeing perspectives of your coworkers or having patience with clients. And you kind of just want to pull away. It's as if your whole worldview has changed from this openness and client-centered type of work to almost like a barrier around yourself to keep you safe because of the emotional exhaustion that you have experienced due to the work that you do. So, what are some of the things that can cause burnout or kind of work along with burnout? Secondary trauma. So, the definition of secondary trauma is basically that it's the indirect exposure. So, that's someone telling you their stories. You didn't actually experience this, but when someone tells you a story, many of us experience it along with them. To traumatic events through hearing client stories. Symptoms, PTSD symptoms. So if we hear a very traumatic story, many of us will relive that story in our head afterwards or have images from it, or something may happen and it reminds us of the story. So symptoms you might experience are these intrusive thoughts, emotional numbness, like an inability to connect with others because you just heard something so traumatic, or difficulty concentrating because you're constantly thinking about it. So, impact, sudden and acute emotional and stress symptoms that are short term but can become chronic. So, the idea about secondary trauma is that it's acute in the moment and normally it lifts unless it's an ongoing exposure to high stress situations without recovery time. And that's when it's burnout. Okay. Vicarious trauma. So this is an internal transformation that happens. So it occurs when a person, as a result of prolonged exposure to others' traumatic stories, has a shift in their worldview. And symptoms can be hopelessness, difficulty trusting others, or questioning the meaning of life. The impact could be gradual and cumulative long-term internal transformation of beliefs and values that is long-lasting. So how I've seen this come up is people will come into the field and they will want to make big impactful changes on the field. They'll want to work, they believe that their work really is affecting others in positive ways. And then after a certain period of time, because of their long-term emotional investment, the traumatic stories, the trauma that they see in their clients, they have this internal shift where they believe they can't impact the world positively anymore, and they just want to stop trying. They don't see the work that they're doing and the positive impact that it's having. Compassion fatigue. So the idea behind this is that it's the physical, emotional, and psychological exhaustion experienced as a result of prolonged empathy and caring for others. So when we're giving and giving every day, all day to our clients, we can experience this physical, emotional, and psychological exhaustion. So what it looks like is emotional fatigue, a sense of detachment, irritability, and reduced ability to empathize. The impact can be a gradual emotional depletion and reduced empathy that leads to burnout. So, what this has looked like in my life is I'll work all day and I'll come home and I am so exhausted. It's really hard for me to be patient with my children and my husband. So when I realize that, when I see this irritability or this inability to be empathetic towards my clients or towards my kids, it's a red flag in my mind that I am experiencing compassion fatigue and I need to make a change because if I don't, burnout could be around the corner. Another big part of compassion fatigue is it becomes difficult to engage or care effectively with your clients, which can be very detrimental to your clients because they're there for care and engagement. So that's why it's so important to have a deep understanding of yourself and what burnout looks like for you, because when you become burned out, it can it can have an impact on your clients and the work that you do. Okay, so we're gonna watch a video here.
Meet Bernice, Judy, and Sean. They all work in the social service industry. Bernice is a residential care worker who cares for vulnerable adults. Working with her residents used to be a positive and fulfilling experience. Recently, she's been canceling appointments with her friends and forgetting simple tasks at work. She was also starting to talk about quitting her job more frequently. Bernice was in fact experiencing symptoms of burnout. This is Judy. Judy started work as a case manager in a shelter for victims of domestic violence about 2 years ago. Recently, Judy shared with her close friends that she turned down her partner's marriage proposal as she was afraid that he would hit her or start being over-controlling after marriage. She also started having negative and pessimistic thoughts about love and relationships. Judy's symptoms were consistent with that of vicarious trauma. This is Sean. Part of Sean's job as a psychologist in the child welfare sector involves working with aggressive or suicidal clients. Sean has recently been having frequent nightmares about his clients and has difficulty sleeping. He has also been jumpy, easily startled, constantly on the lookout for signs of anger and aggression in others, and worries about being physically attacked by his clients. Sean's symptoms were similar to those of post-traumatic stress disorder, and he was experiencing secondary traumatic stress. How can helping professionals like Bernice, Judy, and Sean cope with burnout, vicarious trauma, and secondary traumatic stress? Here are some useful strategies for prevention and recovery grouped under A, B, C. A. Awareness. Be aware of your own stress triggers. Identify any unhelpful thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes that can prevent you from caring for yourself. If you notice changes in your work or personal functioning, talk about these changes with your supervisor. You can also use questionnaires to screen yourself for symptoms of burnout, vicarious trauma, or secondary traumatic stress. If you are a supervisor, look out for signs and symptoms that your supervisees may be experiencing and support them in managing these symptoms. Seek help from a mental health professional if you are experiencing signs and symptoms which are affecting your functioning. B. Balance. Balance your work and personal life by setting healthy boundaries. For example, speak to your supervisor about managing your workload, especially when you start to feel overwhelmed. Practice self-care by prioritizing time for leisure and relaxation, such as doing sports, meditating, painting, interest groups, or journaling. C. Connection. Prioritize relationships with your family and friends so that you can reach out and seek support. Connection with ourselves can also help us better understand our own body signals and identify what we need to recover. Organizations should also ensure that staff are provided with opportunities to interact with each other and provide informal support to one another. In addition, formal supervision, ongoing skills training, and access to intervention like counseling or therapy are important too. Burnout, vicarious trauma, and secondary traumatic stress can happen to anyone, especially those working in helping professions with people who have experienced trauma. Both organizations and individuals have a part to play in preventing and supporting one another through these experiences.
So the most important pieces of that video that I see are these ideas that we need to have self-awareness and balance in our lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that video was overviewing. It's important to recognize early signs of burnout and secondary trauma. So reflecting on recent emotional and physical changes through self-exploration, you can ask yourself, am I feeling detached or cynical about work? Have I been more fatigued or irritable than usual? You can also use journaling or check-ins with colleagues to track and discuss your symptoms. I also think about, have I been exercising lately? Have I been negatively interacting with those around me? What's my outlook on the world? Those are all things I think about when I'm starting to feel down about work, to try to catch myself before I actually burn out. So we talked a little bit about implementing grounding techniques with our clients, but a lot of the techniques that I use with my clients, I do on myself. And it's really interesting because I can figure out the ones that work best for me and then share them with my clients from my perspective and what works good. So I really do think the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method that I talked about in an earlier training, where you identify 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste, is very helpful for me. And then also, I do practice deep breathing where I inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and exhale for 4 seconds. And then I normally try to move up in the number of seconds that I hold each of those and purse my lips when I exhale. Those are all super helpful for grounding, I think. So I use those when I'm starting to feel agitated or anxious, and it really helps me to prolong myself in whatever situation I'm experiencing at work or in my life. So this is a really big one, and we have talked about boundaries in this training, but it's really important to set and maintain boundaries, not only with your clients, but with your work, your coworkers, and your bosses. So define work-life boundaries, such as limiting work-related discussions during personal time, knowing what you can give to work and what you can't, how much time you can and how much time you can't. Politely decline additional responsibilities when overwhelmed. An example of that is either at home, in your social life, or at work. Something you could say is, I appreciate the opportunity, but I need to focus on my current workload to give my best. So engage in proactive self-care. Schedule time for activities that restore energy, such as journaling, exercise, or hobbies. Participate in peer debriefings or therapy to process work-related stress. It can be really nice to talk to coworkers, especially after a traumatic event, to kind of debrief what happened. And as we've learned about trauma, having someone that we trust can really help us so those traumatic incidences that we experience don't stick and become trauma for us. Another thing I do is I actually schedule self-care into my week on my schedule. That can be really helpful because it will hold me accountable instead of thinking, oh yeah, I am going to go rock climbing today. I actually will look at my schedule for the week and I will put rock climbing on my schedule so that I'm beholden to it, which I think can be a little bit more, it kind of gets me ready for it and willing to do it if it's on my schedule. So collaborate on resilience. It's important to work with team members or supervisors to identify supportive resources, such as access to mental health days. So taking days off when you're feeling burnt out, it's important. It's going to prolong you in this field if you do that. Looking for peer support groups, having some sort of support group, whether it's some sort of 12-step program, like there's Codependence Anonymous, there's, all AANA, there's Al-Anon, there is all sorts of groups out there that can support you in the 12-step world, but I also like to extend that to exercise groups, like groups that go rock climbing or biking groups or running groups or book clubs or some sort of support group outside of work where you can get together with people and do something that you really enjoy. Last, I think continuing your own professional development through workshops is really, really important, because if we're constantly growing, then we won't find ourselves getting stagnant and becoming burnt out. Okay, so those are how I would suggest to not only identify burnout, but how to manage it. We're going to do a scenario here, talk about Jake. So the Rural Mobile Crisis Unit has a sharp increase in calls involving addiction and acute mental health crisis. Over the past 3 months, Jake, a relatively new crisis responder with less than a year of experience, has been working extra shifts to cover staffing shortages. Recently, he has become increasingly withdrawn and irritable during team meetings. Jake's colleague Lisa shares with her supervisor Karen that Jake has been struggling emotionally after responding to a series of challenging cases, including a fatal overdose and a domestic violence situation involving addiction. Jake confided in Lisa, saying, "I can't stop replaying the scenes in my head, and I'm starting to dread every call we get." Karen schedules a meeting with Jake to discuss his experiences and develop strategies to address his burnout and secondary trauma. So, goal 1 for the supervisor: identify the signs of burnout and secondary trauma Jake is experiencing and validate his feelings. Goal 2, provide immediate tools and strategies to help Jake manage his emotional well-being. Goal 3, develop a long-term plan to build resilience for Jake and the rest of the team. So here's the application of key concepts. Recognizing burnout and secondary trauma. Karen acknowledges Jake's symptoms such as emotional exhaustion, intrusive thoughts, and irritability, and opens a conversation by expressing concern. "Jake, I've noticed you've seemed more withdrawn and stressed lately. I know this work can be incredibly challenging. How are you holding up?" Here she is providing immediate support. Karen reassures Jake that his feelings are a normal response to the intense nature of their work, saying, "What you're experiencing happens to many crisis responders. It doesn't mean you're not good at this. It means you care deeply." So this is normalizing the behavior. We use this a lot in motivational interviewing. This is normal behavior. And this is very validating for not only our clients, but our coworkers. Karen offers immediate steps such as reducing Jake's workload temporarily to allow for recovery, encouraging Jake to take a mental health day and disconnect from work, pairing Jake with a mentor who can help him process difficult cases. So all these are going to support Jake for his long-term, for his ability to stay in this field long-term. Educating Jake on burnout and secondary trauma. Karen explains how these issues can impact professionals in addiction and crisis intervention, highlighting symptoms and coping mechanisms. So burnout and secondary trauma can sneak up on us, especially when we are constantly exposed to intense situations. So let's talk about how you can protect your emotions. So Karen introduces Jake to self-care practices such as mindfulness exercises and journaling to help him decompress after shifts. She also wants to collaborate on a resilience plan. Karen and Jake develop a personalized plan, setting boundaries such as disconnecting from work, communication after hours, scheduling weekly check-ins to monitor Jake's well-being, encouraging participation in peer support groups and regular debriefings. Karen also implements organizational changes to support the entire team, a monthly workshop on managing burnout and secondary trauma, regular team debriefings after high-stress cases to encourage shared processing. So all these things can really help prolong people's time in our field. Outcome: Jake begins to feel more supported and less isolated in his role because she built connection with him. He attends peer support meetings and takes advantage of counseling services offered by the organization. Over time, he regains confidence and emotional balance. Karen's team-wide initiatives improve morale and reduce the stigma around discussing burnout. So here's our debrief discussion. What signs of burnout and secondary trauma did Jake exhibit? Well, there were examples of emotional withdrawal, intrusive thoughts, and irritability. How did Karen address Jake's needs effectively? Well, by validating his feelings, providing immediate relief strategies, and collaborating on a sustainable resilience plan. And also, she really connected with Jake and helped him build connection for the future. What organizational challenges can help prevent burnout for the entire team? Regular trainings, debriefing sessions, and fostering a supportive workplace culture. So what are our key points? Well, we want to recognize burnout and secondary trauma. Early identification is crucial for this. So be on the lookout for your own emotional withdrawal, intrusive thoughts, and irritability. Proactive self-care. Implement mindfulness, journaling, and setting boundaries to manage stress effectively. Personalized resilience plans. Collaborate on tailored strategies, including peer support, debriefings, and mental health days. Create your own resilience plan. How are you going to stay in this field long term? Make sure you have that awareness and you understand how it's affecting you and what's activating you. Organizational support. So workshops, team debriefings, and a supportive work culture can prevent burnout across the team. Okay, well, I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much.